Hi, welcome back to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. We've been talking about proper methods of biblical interpretation and taking into account historical context and genre. And what I would like to talk about next is the idea of textual context. That is, when we're trying to understand the meaning of a specific verse, we don't want to just pluck the verse out of the surrounding verses that it's encouched in. For instance, if we have a verse, let's say here, we want to take into account all the verses that came previous and all the verses that come after it. We want to kind of get the surrounding context of that one verse in order to properly interpret, in order to properly understand and apply a verse. And I see this so much, and it's so sad how many times I see verses taken completely out of context and given meanings that the author never intended the verse to have because context isn't considered. And there are so many examples that I could show you of this, but for time's sake, I just want to show you one in John chapter 9. John chapter 9. John chapter 9, notice specifically verse 3. Jesus answered, "It was neither this man that sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him." Now, when you take that verse on face value, without considering context at all, it sounds like Jesus is saying that this man that he's talking about, nor his parents sinned. Meaning they're sinless. They're perfect. Now, the problem is, of course, the Bible teaches that only Jesus was sinless. Only Jesus was perfect. So how is it that Jesus is saying that this man nor his parents sinned? Well, listen, if we ignore context, that's exactly what we have to take from that verse. But when we consider the context, the verses before and the verses that follow, well, it makes perfect sense what Jesus is saying. In fact, look in verses 1 and 2 of John 9. It says, "As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?'" So you see, they see this blind man, and Jesus' disciples want to know, okay, why is he blind? And specifically, who sinned? Was it this man's sin that caused his blindness, or was it this man's parents' sin that caused his blindness? And Jesus' answer is simply, well, no, it's neither that this man or his parents sinned. In other words, it's not, the blindness was not caused by the sins of the parents or by his own sins. No, he tells us why he was blind in that very same verse in verse 3. It was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, that may be a head scratcher too. Well, what in the world is he talking about? The works of God displayed in him? What? Well, when we go ahead and read the rest of the verses that follow, what we see is Jesus heals this blind man. He gives him sight, and God is glorified, and essentially he performs the works of God on this man, and the works of God are displayed in him. So Jesus is saying it's not because of sin that this man has been born blind, but it's so that I can go and heal him and really glorify God in front of all these people, so that they'll believe that I'm He, so that they'll believe in the Lord and God who sent me, and just marvel at the works of God. Now, also, let me just make this little bonus point. Since we've talked about historical context and how that really helps the Bible kind of really pop and come to life, well, the Jews at that time, they had this really distinct connection between sin and sickness. So, for instance, whenever a man was sick or whenever a man underwent some sort of tragedy, well, they just assumed it was sin. That's why when you read the book of Job, even though Job had not sinned, at least to deserve the treatment that he was receiving, from Satan's attacks, his friends accused Job of sinning, and they didn't comfort him, and they just kept telling Job how sinful he was. Well, that's because there was that direct connection, and that's exactly why the disciples have this issue with the blind man. They're saying, hey, you know, who sinned? How come this man is blind? I hope that that's helpful. I hope that that makes sense, and I hope that you see how important it is to take the surrounding context of whatever text that we're looking at into account. Thanks so much for your interest in spiritual things. Lord willing, I'll see you next time.